What's up, everybody? Welcome back to What They Teach You in High School. Hey, today we're talking about special interest groups. And if you need to know one thing about special interest groups, it's that absolutely none of them are funding this program. Yet. Welcome back to What They Teach You in High School. All right, Herkle-Dirklers, and listen, I think I'm going to start calling you guys like kind of a slightly mean name at the beginning of the episodes to really grab your attention and draw you in for the rest of the episode. Although some of you guys might take being called a Herkle-Dirkler as a compliment, but that's because you're sick. You're sick and you're weird. All right, so interest groups. Listen, they're controversial to say the very least. And in fact, they're so controversial that our homie James Madison, he actually wrote an article about them at the beginning of the country's founding in the book, The Federalist Papers. Madison says this about interest groups. By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. There are two methods of curing the mischiefs of faction, the one by removing its causes, the other by controlling its effects. The one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence, the other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. It could never be more truly said than of the first remedy that it was worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, but it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life, because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life, because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. I mean, if that doesn't sum up interest groups, I don't know what possibly could. So interest groups are essentially the thousands of different groups that people associate with. And if you recall from the amendments video, and go watch it if you haven't already, the First Amendment gives us the freedom of association. We're talking about the First Amendment here, people. And there's over 5,000 different associations. We call them political action committees. And 5,000 is a number on the low end. But I didn't want any of you trolls calling me out and saying, actually, there's only 4,976 PACS in America. There's not. There's like probably 6,000, but I'm going to say 5 just to be safe. And these political action committees are things you might have heard of, like the National Rifle Association or the NRA, or the AARP, which is the American Association of Retired People. I mean, the retired people have their own group that they hang out in, and they get great benefits from it, I think. Additionally, you have the United Auto Workers Union, the National Education Association. You can't throw a rock in Washington, D.C. without hitting 3 political action committees' windows. And I would recommend not doing that because part of the process that they engage in is litigation, so they'll probably sue you if you break their window. And these over 5,000 political action committees have great influence on the political process. In 2022, political action committees raised over $500 million. And these PACs have some pretty stringent requirements for how much you can donate to them. So the max is $5,000 per year per individual. And that means that they're raising tons and tons of money from lots and lots of different people. Some through dues, some through donations, others by calling you endlessly and begging you for their money until you just finally hang up and send them $3 so they'll stop calling you on the promise that they will stop calling you. But that just prompts them to call you more. And if that's not enough, we have this other thing called SuperPACS, which are like super duper strong PACs. They should be called super duper strong PACs in my humble opinion, but they're not. They're called SuperPACs. And SuperPACs are like PACs on steroids. In fact, they allow people to give unlimited contributions. And in this year alone, 2023, in anticipation of the upcoming 2024 election, super PACs have raised over $2 billion. $2,735 million, according to OpenSecrets.org, which ironically is a political organization that does some fundraising of itself. So, you got to follow the money to follow the money. And listen, I'm no biblical scholar, all right? I'm not here to tell you whether there's morality in raising tons and tons of money based on your specific interests. But what I will suggest is that most people would claim that one of the problems with our electoral politics is that there's way too much money involved. We're talking about billions of dollars, $1 billion. But nonetheless, like Mr. James Madison suggested, these interest groups, these factions, they're inevitable unless we decided we were going to brainwash everyone into thinking exactly the same thing. And let me tell you, as a high school teacher, it's hard to get students to think about anything, let alone everyone thinking the same thing about the same thing at the same time. So then, what do these interest groups do? Let's get into it. There's 4 kind of major responsibilities of interest groups. First thing that they're doing is lobbying. And you might know that term, but essentially what a lobbyist is they go and attempt to influence policymakers to favor specific legislation or to oppose specific legislation based on the interest group's interests. And lobbying kind of has a negative connotation with it, but it really is the experts coming and informing the politicians on what they should understand about the issues. However, you got to be careful because obviously these lobbyists have their own interests in mind, and so they're not always using the best facts available to present the information. But it's up to your politicians to be smart enough to smell the BS in the room. And that kind of nicely leads us into our next point, which is that interest groups are often conducting research and creating policy proposals that they can go and share with their legislators, and then those legislators can take those policy ideas and present them to the legislature. And the third thing is that oftentimes interest groups are engaging in litigation, and litigation is just a fancy way of saying that they're suing one another. And fortunately in this country, we live in a place where people sue one another rather than fight it out in the town square. Although it would be kind of fun. Never mind. No. It wouldn't be. It would be a bad idea. We should just sue each other. And finally, interest groups are oftentimes involved in grassroots mobilization. That's just a fancy way of saying that they get the people that support their interest groups to go out and vote, to go out and raise awareness for their cause, to make their governments respond to their interests. And I know that I kind of flippantly covered the fact that there's lots of money in electoral politics and that it might be a problem with the country, but ultimately these interest groups aren't going away. However, it is worth knowing that they exist and what they're doing and how they're doing it. We know there are 4 major influences that make an interest group particularly powerful. First, we know that some of these interest groups have a large number of people that support their interests, and that will of course make the interest group more influential. Additionally, if they don't necessarily have lots of people, they might have wealthy donors who fund their organization, which allows them to voice their opinion. Secondly, unity of purpose. The American Association of Retired People, that group of people has a variety of different interests. Fortunately, most people are retired when they're old, and so while they don't necessarily have unity of voice, they have lots of people, which checks that first box. However, the National Rifle Association is pretty much in existence for one single reason: to protect the Second Amendment. And therefore, the unity of voice is pretty clear and resounding, regardless of the number of people who support the interest. Third is effective leadership. If you have an effective leader who can drive a clear mission and vision, you can significantly impact the likelihood of your interest being taken seriously, especially by legislators. And finally, information and expertise. If you have the facts on your side, it's sort of hard to argue with them, regardless of what side you're coming from. And what do you say we end where we began, folks? Remember James Madison, right in Federalist 10? He suggested that you can either stifle interest groups, like you would need to stifle air to put out a fire. Alternatively, you can persuade everyone to think the exact same thing. And about that, Mr. Madison says, the second expedient is as impractical as the first would be unwise. As long as the reason of man continues fallible and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. As long as the connection subsists between his reason and his self-love, his opinions and his passions will have a reciprocal influence on each other, and the former will be objects to which the latter will attach themselves. From the protection of different and unequal faculties of acquiring property, the possession of different degrees and kinds of property immediately results, and from the influence of these on the sentiments and views of the respective proprietors ensues a division of the society into different interests and parties. So there you have it, folks. You heard it from the best, Mr. Madison himself. Different interests will create different parties. If we want our society to survive, we will always have interest groups and parties. But it is always worth knowing who they are, what they're up to, and how they get their funding. So hey, respond down below. Do you think interest groups are a benefit to the United States society, or do you think that they're an undue influence on our politics? Like, subscribe, hit the little bell button so you know I'm coming next time. Hey, make sure you're sharing these videos with your family, with your friends, and most importantly, with your high school social studies teacher. Hey, thanks again for watching what they teach you in high school. Until next time, folks, peace!